live audience and a demo corner where we can test games, just like back in the day before the pandemic. So this is pretty awesome. And in addition to that, we have awesome guest speakers tonight. Teemu Haila from Metaplay, soon presenting his stuff. And after him, also the hybrid game project students from University of Jyväskylä presenting their, well, hybrid games that we are also able to test here in the Digi and Game Center after the presentations. But as for the live feed that we are doing, we're going to limit that to the speakers, so you should be able to see all the amazing slides they have prepared and our cozy setting here at the stage. So, without further ado, enjoy and welcome Teemu.
Hey, nice to be here. So, but I kind of wanted to come here. Well, first of all, I want to come here to just see people, right? It's been 2 years since anybody, so I'm just lovely being with people. Looking forward to talking with all of you a little bit later today. But to start things off, I wanted to essentially share our story a little bit. So Metaplay, we are a new company founded just before the pandemic, means that you probably haven't ever heard of us or seen us because we've been somewhere locked down with the rest of the universe. But before I get into the company and our brief story, who am I? Why am I here? So my name is Teemu. I'm one of the co-founders, chief product officer, whatever that means. And I've been around games for a while, so maybe 14, 15 years at this point. So I used to have my own games company called PlayRaven previously. We did strategy games for touchscreens, raised about, I want to say, 6 million to run the company, sold it off to Rovio a few years back. I was a game lead at Vuga in Berlin, working on their top-grossing mobile titles, which was a lot of fun, Diamond Dash and so on. And I've been working with IGDA for a while, so got a lifetime award from that a few years back, meaning I'm a vigilante community manager when I have time, and a lot of passion for the industry. And my story today really begins from that moment of selling my company to Rovio, seeing the team off there, and then thinking about what to do next, right? What's my next games company? And looking at the market back in the day, I sort of realized that the games that I want to do, I want them to be sort of mass market games, big audience games. I really enjoy mobile, I enjoy touchscreens, I enjoy strategy and or slow interaction simulations, and that is a good fit for the market. But to really be successful in that market, you have to aim for this crowd that's at the top. Like there's no in the middle, right? Like you have to be at the top or you don't survive. And that's okay from a creative standpoint. But practically speaking, it basically sets like this minimum bar that you have to hit in terms of retention metrics and all the rest. And that just means that you can't make anything. You have to make this fairly complete, fairly large product, right? Like there's a barrier to entry and the barrier is high. And one of the interesting side effects of this is that to make something that can be played by millions and tens of millions and maybe even hundreds of millions of players, it's essentially this huge persistent world with a lot of social interactions, and there's nothing off the shelf that you can buy that helps you make one of those things, right? So everybody, if you look at those companies, whether it's abroad or here in Finland even, PlayRaven we had our bespoke stack for this stuff. But so does Rovio and Supercell and Next Games and Seriously and EA and so on. Everybody in Finland has basically solved this problem by themselves because they have to, because there's no other choice. So now back to me, building the company. I want to make a new game startup and I have to build all of this same stuff, again, from scratch, to be able to even prototype a game that's more, played by multiple millions of players, whether I run that with bots or anything else. And I briefly did the math, and if you want to pay yourself salaries and your team some salaries, then you're looking at $500,000 minimum, it's just €500,000 in terms of the raw man months required to build off a sort of your own platform or engine, whatever you want to call it, even if you use Unity and all the rest. And I don't know about you guys, but to me that's a lot of money. I don't have that money just to prototype a game, right? Because then the game's going to fail and you need to pivot and iterate and it takes a while. So, enter Metaplay. We basically said, what if in this time around, what if instead of founding another games company, what if we actually founded a tech company, solved this backend problem, and see if that makes sense, if there's a business, and if this is a problem that others are having as well, that others are seeing. And that's what we ended up doing. A very, very short description of what we set out to do. Essentially, let's make something that can replace this need to build something in-house. Let's be better than in-house backend development. What does that mean? Roughly speaking, it means that we need to make something that's amazing to use, it's a joy to use as a tool, right? Something that we enjoy using. It's something that actually solves the problems that we have in our studio. So it works for the kind of studios, the kind of teams that actually make top-grossing games. And it's something that solves not only the development problem, but also works for 10 years. If you're making something that seriously competes with Farmville, it needs to be alive for tens of years, multiple generations of tech and devices and so on. So it's kind of a fairly long-standing problem. And what if you break this solution down, something that addresses this problem, if you break it down into pieces, what does it look like? Well, then essentially we need to build our Unity client libraries. We need to build the actual game server that runs the simulation of the game that players log into and keeps track of save games and multiplayer states and all that. Then we need to build the tools that your customer support teams use, because if you're aiming for top grossing, you're gonna end up having, again, tens or hundreds of millions of players. You're gonna be doing customer support in all the different time zones, in all the different languages. You need tools. So we need to build essentially all the kind of non-technical people tools to manage those games, which is quite an undertaking. And then we need to build the infrastructure that all of this runs, whether it's the cloud in quotes or something else. We need to solve these 4 distinct domains at the same time, and that's basically the product that you can use to launch games with. So aside from this technical problem that we need then set out to solve, I sort of asked myself, what are the bits that make this startup different compared to what I've done before, or what you typically see done either in games or as technology startups? And 3 things come to personally that I feel we're doing differently this time. So first of all, we are starting from a tool that, we are the end users of our tool. It's a tool that we want to love to use, instead of, say, making a service for other people to make something that we don't necessarily end up, that we just provide and others use. No, this is for us, right? We're performing for ourselves. Second of all, we're bootstrapping the company, and that's quite different. So the trend is at the moment to raise venture capital, whether it's $500,000 or $1 million as a sort of seed round-ish, and then you're set out for this track to raise at least 5 to 10 million, aim for the big markets, and if you succeed, maybe raise even more, and finally either sell to a big company or IPO. It's a very specific track that's sort of fast acceleration. We chose not to do that. Instead, it's all our own money, no external investors, and that means we have to be sort of cash flow conscious at all times and grow the business at the same time as we grow the product. Very, very hard limit that we took on ourselves. And then finally, instead of going for the big audience, as you might think, like Unity, it's for everybody, democratizing game development. We don't. We don't democratize game development. We actually aim for a very, very few sort of key partnerships in the beginning, and then go extremely deep into those relationships and grow the company with a few kind of key VIP customers, if you will. The point of all of this is to basically say, let's not just make a tool, let's make something that we believe in. Let's make it for a few people that also love it, and let's make that relationship produce some money so that we stay alive, and essentially our life depends on this succeeding, which I think is kind of exciting. And also, so if this was roughly the approach, then this relies on a few, I like to call them hypotheses, but it really just means that we're making some assumptions, and it's a couple of very discrete assumptions. If these are wrong, the business is somewhat doomed, or we have to pivot strongly. So a few of the key assumptions behind this approach in the company were, for example, that we are going to solve the problems of the top grossing route. What that means is that the top 100 companies making the most money, as you probably know of the mobile market and games in general, it's very hit-driven business. So the couple of top players the biggest companies, they make about 99% of all of the money in games. Right? Very few companies make all the money. And we want to solve the problems of those companies, which are very different from the companies of emerging startups or maybe companies that are aiming lower, which is most of them. But we chose, no, let's go for that very specific crowd. And while we're doing it, and maybe as a consequence of us aiming for those guys, then our assumption, number two, is that all of these top 100 companies, they are very unique, both in the game itself and then how they work, their team structures. Meaning that a Chinese company of 10,000 people and their teams of hundreds or maybe even 1,000 people in a single game functions and needs very different kind of solutions than, say, a team at Supercell, which is still famous for keeping them under 20 people in many cases, both being in the same top grossing, right? So there's a lot of difference in what a tech solution, something needs to do, essentially. The spec is very unclear, hence needs to be super flexible. This is one of our hypotheses, to be able to, succeed. And then as a sort of a third thing, how do we achieve a high quality product? Well, the only way, hypothesis number 3, is that we keep, quote, dog fooding, or basically using it ourselves at all times. That we essentially either ship our own games or we are super in depth with our customers, shipping their games with them. And if our tech sucks, we should feel that, right? Like, wow, we should suffer our bad decisions. And that's how we sort of keep honest and make something that we can be proud of, theoretically. All right, so if this is how we set out, and what I kind of think are the interesting bits and bobs of how we set out the company, well, it's been about 3 years. The company was officially founded 2.5 years ago, but we've been at this for about 3 years. What actually happened? Well, we've got some learnings compared to what I just said of the initial kind of angles to this thing. Learning number 1 was that this whole idea of aiming for revenue on day one is fantastic, and I should do it. You should do it even if you're a games company. And I know it's very hard in a games company to get some money the day one you're making a game because the game is not done. So how do you make money? No, but that's the problem that we chose on ourselves, and the reason it's an amazing idea, other than money is good, is that a successful business model fundamentally is very, very slow to iterate on, just like a game or a company. And by trying to do that from day one, we have 2-3 years worth of iteration on it. So turns out a lot of our initial ideas didn't scale at all, and we had to change them. An example of an idea we had to pivot here is that we started with a very, very emphasis on co-development, which means that we were essentially doing kind of bespoke collaborations with games companies to work very hands-on in their games, make their games for them, or parts of their games for them, while we're developing our own tech. And we are banking very, very far away from that at the moment, where it's almost 100% license and support deals. So our business is like completely different 2 years, 3 years down the line. And without going into details of kind of what our offering is, but let's say that we have our SDK that does licensing and so on that we had from day one, but now we officially have sort of a support tier next to it that we had no idea that we needed this day one. Like if we set our plan in stone day one, we would have missed out on the very fundamental proposition that we have now that, hey, you get our technology, yes, but you also get our know-how, you get our experience from shipping all these games, and we can help you out, maybe save some time for you. And that can be insanely valuable for a startup. Okay, number 2 out of 3. Sure, everybody knows in Finland that quality before quantity, but what that means for us, and this is back to the dog fooding point, that actually, even 3 years later, I was doing the math from last year, and we are spending about 15% out of all of our time in the company. At worst, it's about 20%, so out of every month, almost a week. So all of us in the company, 15% goes not into product development, but actually just taking what we've done and sending it to our customers. and helping them migrate to the latest version and helping them adopt the new features and so on. It's a huge overhead for the company, massive inefficiency. But as a consequence, again, we get to feel the pain every single time we do that transition. So actually that's when we learn. That's kind of our shipping moment. Like when you push a game to the market and you get the first player reviews saying, I'm stuck at level 1, the game sucks. And then that's the moment when we have that feedback and we go, oh, right, let me just, and then we get to fix whatever obvious problems we didn't see, for example. And since we're a tech company, then we do a lot of long-standing choices like what kind of APIs do you use to declare, I don't know, guilds. So now that we are kind of doing a lot of releases, roughly 10 releases a year at the was the highest point, but now we're doing slightly less. Since we kind of drag all of our customers always to the latest release, it means that we can evolve super fast what kind of features we can do and how they feel like. Like we can break the APIs all the time because we can guarantee they're always on the latest version and we can migrate you all the time. So this is interesting because I don't know of anybody else who does this. So this is something we ended up doing as a rule when we said, let's dogfood this all the time. So again, one of the minor pivots because of this learning is that we had this concept of additive updates, like everybody has. You update a minor version of Unity. It's not supposed to break anything. You just get a new feature, and you're safe. So we want to do this as well, but at the moment, no. Every update we do is completely breaks everything. We fix it for you, and off we go. So then we get to kind of keep the innards beautiful, if you will. And that allows us to ship really fast. So we keep pushing major new updates all the time. These are like our last 10 releases from last year or something. Minor things like we added guilds, we added analytics, we added localization, so on. A/B testing, that took like 6 months to do. So we get to move really fast, and that's exciting to me. But then maybe an example of something that we actually, when I say we, I mean me, something I completely failed to see that we had to properly pivot on. This thing that I said about top-grossing games looking different, that everybody ends up building slightly different kinds of games with different types of teams, that's true. But during the first year or 2 years or 3 years of a top-grossing team, they actually look almost identical to each other. They're all small, they're all very well funded, usually. They have way more money than they have time, and they have a lot of problems that they can't solve because it's a small team with a lot of money and a big goal and so on. So these constraints and the starting point actually funnel all these companies through a very similar path. You need to prototype quickly and so on, like the things that we talk about here in education, and if you're in a small startup, you know what I'm talking about. And that means that from our point of view, instead of building this tool that's amazingly flexible and you can do whatever you want with it, which we did, we actually kind of hard pivoted away, not completely away from it, but we essentially noticed that to really solve the problems for these teams, what we actually need to do is pre-build all of the obvious features that everybody wants to implement. So we sort of went back to game development, kinda. And what that means is that, for example, this is a screenshot that I took on the train on the way here of our LiveOps dashboard, so the web interface that you would use to manage a live game. It's full of stuff, right? In this case, I'm opening up my own player. And for example, you can see all of the tools that an admin could use to send resources to the players. We have an in-game mailing system we're just basically saying, you developer, you're gonna have an in-game mailing system in your game, and you're gonna have resources that can be donated, and you're probably gonna have guilds, and you're gonna have A/B tests, and you're gonna have this, and that. We're just basically telling you, do all this, because it's not a question of if you're gonna do them, it's a question of when you're gonna do them, if you're aiming for top crossing. So we essentially start to pre-bundle in all this stuff that's ahead of you, and then you can adopt them one thing at a time, making your shipping a lot faster. And for me, that's kind of fun, because we get to do games again, kinda, that we get to do design, how would I say, we get to be part of the design process and go really deep into what does a guild system look like an ideal guild system. I find that entertaining myself, but also this is just something that I thought we would never do. But that's pretty much like 90% of all we do at the moment, is to make that initial let's build games quickly experience as smooth as possible. Interesting. So from this kind of quick story and starting point, our kind of angle to the market, couple of first pivots, a few years, where are we at? Well, first of all, us as a company, we're a team of 13 people at the moment and hiring. You should talk to me about it. About 13 people, about 5 nationalities at the moment. Looking to expand that very soon, I hope. Completely self-owned again, so we are masters of our own destiny in this case, no venture capital included. We are live with the product on multiple games, biggest one being Merge Mansion by Metacore, love the game. Tens of millions of players across many different titles, millions and millions every single day on our servers playing games that we haven't done, but that we are part of. That's exciting. We're cash flow positive from day one, so we're profitable as a company, and we're carbon negative. I'm kind of oscillating between which one is more important to me, because I think both are, in this day and age, worth going for. And I'm proud to say that we're part of Pelimetsä, which is this non-profit is kind of obvious, but it's an altruistic movement to essentially protect Finnish forests permanently. And it's like a movement for game developers to donate to this. Over 500,000 was collected already, and we are definitely part of that. So with all this story, happy to share my learnings and just talk about games for a while. So good to be here.
Thank you so much.
Cheers, cheers.
And whoa, that was a lot in a short time, but like very impressive. Thank you. And I forgot to say that if you have any questions, obviously just write into the chat. But that's a usual thing. I don't see any questions. People were probably just so overwhelmed by everything. But at the moment, let's invite the discussion so everybody also in the back don't feel too scared to kind of join in and sit on the front row as well. But perhaps if I may start the discussion, I have a ton of questions for you. So. Yeah, you kind of. First I want to comment on that. It's really cool to see how you kind of take the ownership of the everything that you do by like this philosophy of wanting to feel the pain when you are launching or putting out the new SDK. But perhaps just to put a little bit more in a kind of concrete way, this what exactly is the product? It's an SDK, it's a user interface with lots of different tools, it's a cloud. What is included? Can you put it in like...
all of the above, yes.
Yeah.
So we started off with the very core C# game server. Use this to make your games. Kind of like Unity is an engine for the client, we are the engine for the backend. We actually run the game. But then to make that useful, you also need to have the bit that's in Unity, so a Unity SDK for sure. Mm-hmm. And then we ship basically a full-on modern web project. It's a website essentially that connects to the game servers that you saw briefly as a screenshot, so all the tools. And then we ship basically a pre-configured infrastructure. So it's something, the equivalent of a self-inflating boat where you pull on the lever and then it provisions a full cloud infrastructure stack for you, including a Kubernetes cluster in the cloud and like backups, key rotations, all the usual stuff. So the thing is that we can pre-configure this box of toys for you, and then it's end of the day it's a bunch of source code. By the way, we ship all of it as source code, which is kind of fun. So our developers get a huge dump of code from us, and then we say, right, let's make some games on top of this.
Great. As being kind of probably one of the most abstract products I've ever kind of come across, has it been difficult to set up partnerships? It's not the kind of product that you go into some kind of event and just test our system here really quick. It's super cool.
Yeah.
How did you get on with the first partnerships?
Yeah, I think that's a fun question. So, interestingly enough, as everybody knows, Finland's game community, developer community specifically, is amazing. And we actually had our first customer before we had the company. And the way that happened was through IGDA, literally. So we had a bunch of source code, had a thing, we had a laptop, went to IGDA and said, hey, we're doing something like this. And then said, do that enough times. Hey, we're doing something like this. You end up bumping to people who say, we should talk. Like that's, we should talk. And then, from there, we've interestingly, it's kind of a rambling on with that question, that works to an extent. We've had really good time talking with other professionals at IGDA, right? Like we end up meeting the people in other companies whose responsibility it is to solve this problem, a similar problem of technology. Slush is another thing, right? Lots of startups, and Slush is probably our #1 kind of sales event of the year. And the way that works is that I have my iPad, and then I go hang out for 6 hours. And it's basically saying, have you seen this? And then people get interested. Now, the obvious problem there, which I found interesting, is how do you scale that? Like how do you do that in, I don't know, Barcelona or Los Angeles or something else, where there's not necessarily the same community or the same culture of openness? The answer is you don't, right? It's like you have to do something completely different. Yeah. And then pandemic. So we had this interesting constraint of 2 years, don't meet anybody. So that wasn't great. And what we're doing now, it's not done yet, but what we are about to do is essentially, and I'm sort of excited by this, I'm going to do a full-on demo project, a small game that you can play on our website, for example, download from the App Store, and then we would just open up all of our tools public on the internet for that one game, so that you could play it for a little bit, something small, something fun, but then you could open up all the kind of, look behind the curtain, if you will, see the cluster that's running it, see your own player, see the raw data of the game, go donate yourself something, like set up a guild in the back end, all this fun stuff. Which from a sales point of view, yes, you get to poke the product, that's important. But also from a story point of view, like at least for me, when I'm looking at a game, okay, I'm into tools, sure, but I'm as excited by, I want to see what's behind it, how was it made? I'm interested in how things are made. I get a new toy, I want to open it up immediately. So I kind of want to give that experience to others as well. Both from a kind of learning point of view, but then also it's nice that if you like what you see, talk to me. Then.
So you're saying that you are focusing on a small number of customers and kind of going to the deep end with them. How many customers are you operating at the moment with?
Yeah, we have about 6 kind of large projects ongoing, not all of them public, but all of the public ones are in Finland. So working with our neighbors, if you will. Biggest one is obviously Metacore.
Okay, and if I may ask, is this something that emerged from the constraints of the pandemic, so not being able to meet like other people? It's
partly,
yeah.
Kind of model, yes, I think we went further in it, yes. But then it also turned out to be a really good idea, so I think we may have ended up here anyway. So put it one way around, it's, okay, so we were in this box called Finland, and at points a box called Uusimaa, and you're not allowed to leave, but neither was anybody else. So then we happened to be in this locked box with some of the best game developers in the whole world, so that's nice. But so that was obviously good for a deeper relationship. But then if you think about most free-to-play games, you have a lot of startups trying, but then when something hits, that's when you go from a startup into a scale-up. So for example, Metacore. So they knew, and we knew from a very early on point, that this is going to be a huge hit game, that is going to be bringing in sort of hundreds and hundreds of millions of euros every single year, have a lot of large player base. So then the question was, okay, so you need this type of features or this kind of support to get to the market. Let's talk about performance or performance of the servers, or let's talk about how do we set up the initial pipelines to handle the first 10 million players or the 100 million players Literally, how do we figure out the customer support organization's needs, all the good stuff. But now that was a couple of years ago. So today they have a completely different set of constraints of how do we get to the next 100 million players, and what do your developers need for that, what do the players need for that. So I think this is a very kind of lengthy answer where I'm saying, but I'm interested in this. Like, very few people get to experience something like this where you're already massively successful. How do you get to be double the successful? What do you need? So now we're literally having that discussion every day, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, like there's a lot of that kind of amazing business hunch built into this presentation, and also the kind of your ability to tell the story like this. It tells that there's going a huge amount of brain work into the retrospective of how did you end up here and so on. So that's it kind of shines through. About this way of operating, you put it nicely that you're in a box with the like Finnish game developers, the best game developers in the world, in a small constrained space, and then turn that to your benefit. Are you your chief product officer? Does that mean that you are designing the business of the product, or how do you? Because it sounded like with all the pivoting, with all the kind of going back and forth and making it better, and developing your model, not only the product but also the way you operate all the time. How do you do this as a company, these kind of decisions? It needs to be a very effective decision-making culture to end up there, so please elaborate on that.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, it's definitely not by committee, so that's one, right? So nothing good was ever done by a committee. So I've been thinking about this a lot. Like I run the IGDA Leadership Conference, right? And that's a very similar question there every year. And I'm a big fan of this idea that you're like me and everybody else, we should all be led by context. Okay, now I'm like going really far back, but what I mean by that is that everybody who's in a position to make a decision, which is basically everyone in the company, should have all the knowledge that they would possibly need available to them. So nothing's hidden, nothing is only in my head or my co-founders' heads, and then we go into the back room and make a decision and tell you about it. But it's more that we have a clear goal. We hopefully communicate that goal very clearly to everybody in the company. This is what we're up to. Here's a vision, and here's a theory, and here's what, based on the theories, here's what I'm trying to do. And then, anybody who's part of that decision-making process, who has an idea, comes to the work and says, "Ooh, I think we should, instead of doing the things on the backlog, I'm going to do this other thing that I just came up with, today, this morning. I'm going to try to polish this part of the SDK, or ask our customers, hey, do you think we should pivot the game a little bit and do this instead?" As long as everybody is aware of what the goal is, what our constraints are, what we're trying to achieve, and sort of empowered to make a decision on their own, suddenly I don't have to be the guy in charge, right? Like I can just be the guy who's trying to point the way, and then everybody do choices on their own. So that's kind of abstract, but I think it's very fundamental.
Yeah, well, a culture of proactivity and being kind of self-driven and all of that. I think it's nothing new to the startup scene, perhaps, but
in theory, it's nothing new. In practice,
really hard. Yeah,
really hard.
And the practice was the thing that I wanted to ask about. So basically, if you have this ideal of kind of everybody being informed of everything at all times, what kind of procedures actually support that without like too much documentation and meetings and like that kind of overtaking?
Life of meetings.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. So that, man, I want to start to like draw diagrams immediately, like one-to-one communication versus one-to-many communication, and how hubs and spokes and all that. Yeah, I think focus, right? It's all about focus. And that's, by the way, the most difficult thing about our lives is choosing where to focus and what to spend our time on, right? Because if you're trying to be aware of everything all the time, then the only thing you do is absorb information and overload yourself and do nothing.
Yes.
I know a lot of game developers who do that. Like read a lot, do almost nothing. So what we try to do is very explicitly say today or this week or this month or this release, whatever is the cadence. We talk a lot about releases, which takes say 2 months. We're going to focus on these 3 things. Let's hold the design workshops and let's hold the syncs and everything else related to these 3 things and these 3 things only. And we're going to just ignore and completely forget all the rest. So that cuts like 80% of all the things we could be talking about, right? Yeah. And then literally, if that's the big picture choice, then what I'm actually a real big fan of, and I think this translates super well to games companies as well, any creative work, is just trying to organize every single day even as brain ergonomically as possible. That's a very terrible word, brain ergonomics, but I haven't seen a better one.
Yeah, it's descriptive, so
so it's literally asking what is the most effective, least intrusive way for you to use your brain to work. And for us, it's basically saying that even though we're introverts, it kind of works out that in the morning, you want to do logical problems. You're good at math, you're good at programming, you're good at difficult problems. Then you're going to get angry by lunch because you're hungry. And then after lunch, you're going to be sleepy a little bit. So you're probably not going to do very heavy math or anything. Then you kind of get a second wind sometime after lunch for difficult problems, but you're not as good in logic anymore. You're actually better at social problems, interacting with other people and planning. And then towards the end, it's soon the time to go home, but then the trend continues towards more like, let's do the evening sync ups rather than like big focus work. So interestingly, that plus kind of week level habits of say all Thursdays are focus days, or Mondays are planning days, all Fridays are synchronize and wrap up the week days, so you're not stressed out over the weekend. So you have like daily setups, weekly setups, and then the releases of months. When you use this effectively with good focus, it's amazing how much you can get done compared to the usual, oh my god, and let's do everything all the time. And stuff just comes up and so on. So that's, I think the pandemic, now I'm just kind of freewheeling here, but I think the pandemic was really interesting in a way that we and everybody else, we no longer said, you work for me now, so you need to get your ass over to Kamppi Center in Helsinki 9 to 5 every single day and then work on the backlog. Like, no, we're more saying, okay, work wherever you are most comfortable, safe, efficient working, and work in a way that makes you most comfortable, as efficient, so on. So I think it's way more empathetic, and that was partly because of the pandemic, honestly, that we're able to say, let's try to optimize the company.
I think that's a discovery that has been made widely, and not only in the games industry, but in other industries as well. It's kind of funny, you come here with this amazing, cool technology solution, and all we're talking about is like work habits and company culture and people issues, but that's really what I, at the moment, find most fascinating about, because basically you're taking on a huge problem, and your team is not like huge. So it means that you have to have the right kind of people, you need to have the right kind of culture so that everybody works well in sync. So basically you describe the practices that you have. How did you come about establishing that culture? Was that also like pivoting the same way you have been pivoting the product, or is it something that comes from the experience of everybody?
For obviously the experience and my benefit of being interested in leadership and kind of soft skills and how to build companies, sure. So it's a hobby of mine, so that gives me an edge. But it's a lot of iteration, as anything. Like it's like making a game all over again, so that you start off with a hypothesis of a design, but then you kind of acknowledge that it's going to be 1,000 times different at the point when you figure out it's done. Same for the company, same for the company culture and everything else. So in a very real way, we have a weekly sync called kind of Friday Show and Tell that we have every end of the week to wrap up the week and communicate to each other all the cool things that we've done. But it has a set agenda. Because as you know, all meetings should have an agenda, otherwise why the hell are you having it? One point in the agenda every single week is how can we work better together? Mostly it's quiet, honestly. That agenda point, there's nothing there because it's very exhausting to try to be introspective every single week about how you work. But the point is that the question gets asked every single week. And I think that's, I'm sad to say that it's a bit rare, but it's not very difficult. But it's kind of the equivalent, even in a game team, that it's kind of rare for me to be in a game team where every single week you're honestly asking, were we a good team this week? Could we be a better game development team next week, or just a development team, whatever you're doing? So we do that every single week. And I'm happy to say that's paying off. I'm very surprised at where we've ended up. It works, but it's not something I could have built without going through the motions and just listening to people. Empathy, right?
Has there been like the development to that point? Has the culture or practices been very different at some point, and have there been like these really crucial functional conflicts that have changed the direction in a like crucial way?
Yeah. I don't have a juicy, dramatic story, but I have maybe interesting themes that we're talking about a lot. Like one of our co-founders is very fond of travel, meaning that he likes traveling weeks and months at a time throughout the whole year and working remotely. And that's his culture from having done a very long career at like Bell Labs in the US and international consultancies and so on. And that conflicts very strongly with the traditional Finnish model of efficient works face-to-face at the office. This idea that some magic happens when you meet another person and then you have all this quiet, like silent conversation. So now you have two people who just have very long, kind of strong experience of what has been the best way to do things, and it's almost completely polar opposite to each other. So how do you resolve? and it's difficult because it's not an intellectual argument, it's an emotional argument of how you feel like things are most effective being done. So that's just like maybe one example of where it's interesting that we just have to resolve this one by one. And we resolve it by obviously fall back to what are we here for? Like, what's the goal? Well, the goal is to build the company, yes, but the goal is to not burn out while doing it, to live a life while doing it, and make it efficient, be respectful towards each other as we're doing it, because that's how we find an efficient way for all of us as a team dynamic. So it's not like two people being efficient and one guy suffering in a corner and all that. But when we get back to that's what we all want, right? Well, then it turns out there's so many different ways of getting there. And then we just had these ideas that we bring to the table, like I feel like we should all be in a room face to face because I feel like that's a good idea. Not so necessarily. And then it's actually fairly easy to have that conversation once you fall like far enough into the goals and ideas and you're kind of open to different solutions. So funnily enough, we haven't had very strong, let's say, founder problems in that sense. But I think that's just because we're all being very kind of analytical and detached about this. It might be a little bit more difficult if we were doing a passion project purely.
Yeah. But yeah, it sounds like the project is also a kind of perfect match in the way that it's about your passion, so that you take ownership of what your customers get out and how the games work and how the process works and so on. But it's not like this kind of artistic creation directly from your soul, so you are super attached to it. It's like a cool design in that sense. By the way, if you have any questions in the audience, just like raise a hand, and there are no stupid questions. So,
well, first of all, that tool is impressive. Have you thought about expanding the business in the future to be a publisher with a tool like that? Able to provide for, let's say, a small studio who hates backdoor and like all these technical stuff and wants to make like centralize more into making the actual game, but they need help with everything extra. So you could, as a publisher, help with them.
Right. I'll just paraphrase the question for the mic. So that we have a tool for developers, but could we do even more, for example, in the forms of publishing and so on, to let the developer focus even more on just making the game and the creative aspects of it? Sort of, kind of, no. So yes, in the sense that actually we are very much on that road, doing exactly what you described in terms of we are making more opinionated features. As I said earlier, like you're gonna have emails or like mails in your game because you're gonna need them. Here you go. We made it easy. So we're doing that. Then the next level of what we actually, it's not live yet, kind of, or what we're doing right now, maybe releasing in a few weeks, is that we're starting to, through magic of C# reflection and so on, we're actually starting to analyze the code that you've written and start to generate stuff automatically on the dashboard. So literally as you're typing in that my player's wallet has coins and gems, but now it also has gold, then the gold just magically appears in the dashboards and so on without you having to kind of fine tune the tool. So we're essentially starting to take away even more stuff that you would have to consider. And that is very important because it's not about just, oh, I need to modify the web development tool, but it's more saying, no, now you don't have to learn web development, period, and you're still able to get to your goal, right? So we're able to get like complete sections out of your mind. So then the question is, well, how far can we push that thinking? Well, what we are doing for sure in the future, and this is like, I don't know, end of 2020, maybe next year, is we probably will be starting to host your game for you, right? So instead of you having to even know about servers, we're kind of just saying, well, give me your credit card and we'll put it in the cloud. And then essentially we'll figure out how to host 1,000 games, you know, of other people, so that they wouldn't have to consider and learn about, you know, how to maintain a server, essentially, which can be a huge boon for smaller teams. Again, how far can we push that? What we probably are not going to do ever is, you know, quote publisher, which would mean that we probably don't want to do the marketing of the game for you. We probably don't want to do the platform relations on your behalf because that's creative. That's about the ownership of the creative itself, and we're probably not going to fund your game because we're not an investment house. At least I don't have the money to invest. If you do, we should talk. And then what publishers usually nowadays do is the live ops. I think that's interesting. So as far as I know, there's very few live ops as a service. Live ops meaning create events for your game and like engage your player community and so on. That is so new. It's like hasn't existed for more than 5 years, I want to say, in like the mainstream of top grossing games. So I don't even know where we're going to be in 5 years if we're going to have machine learning models that could substantially help you with, as a single person, to keep your game fresh by translating everything you do automatically into 25 different languages and kind of helping you micro-target what is the optimal player experience for this person who seems to like Candy Crush a lot but has never really played you know, city building games, and we can tell by the machine learning model, because that's the way you interact with the game, they clearly have no idea what you're doing, but you like swiping a lot, you know, that sort of thing. It's very much technically possible. No one's done that before. How far can we push it? Good question.
Now, like, I have more questions, but I want to give you a chance.
Are there any other questions in the crowd? Then keep coming.
Hold on, Kathleen, so, is there a danger some of this stuff might destroy the creativity process of some of the studios? In a way, they become lazy, so to call.
Right. So, sort of again paraphrasing. So, as we get more and more opinionated tools, then that shovels you down a certain creative or at least product path. And is there a danger of then games, I don't know, becoming maybe boring or derivative or more like constrained maybe in the wrong way? So short version is kind of yes, right? Like everybody hates what Unity games look like by default, right? Like the default Unity lighting is actually kind of bad, creatively speaking. And the same way, I don't know, websites. Bootstrap is the most used web theme of all time, and it's kind of boring at this point. And it's not even brilliant, but all websites look like it and are bad the same way. So there's very good arguments that that's a bad thing. So in the same way that you're doing a game Metaplay, well, then you're probably gonna have certain core features that we've made. So yes, that puts you down a narrow field. But the reason why we're doing those features and the reason you're going to implement those features is not because of us, it's because you're aiming for that top crossing business case, and that limits your creative space, actually. So that's my shrewd way of saying, it really wasn't me, Mr. Referee, it was the other guy. Like, basically, you've done those choices before you used us, and we're just helping you get there faster. And what I think is the real, like, this is all depressing. What's actually exciting instead of depressing is that if you look at the top crossing, everything is super narrow and almost clone-like in the funnel trying to aim for the crossing. But then once you break top 100, then you get kind of divergence again, because you have the, let's call it the minimum bar of entry features. Guilds, multiplayers, leagues, social systems, whatever, events, offers, all this stuff. And then you've arrived. Now, what do you do to set yourself apart? Right, that's the really interesting bit where all the designers want to be, right? Like now we're building the next generation of, I don't know, guild wars that somehow interacts with this social media, you know, how do you call them, ARGs and so on. Like you're building cool entertainment experiences that somehow relate to the Super Bowl. I don't even know, like these are big things. But to get there, you have to go through this funnel of minimum ticket to ride features. So a very long answer to a fairly simple question, but I actually feel optimistic that if you don't have to do all of the things that we've set out here, but more like once you've done most of it, then you get to creatively make something that doesn't exist yet, that's gonna be played by hundreds of millions. And my question is always, how do I get you there as quickly as possible? Because if you're going to do all of this by yourself, and trust me, I know, it's going to take 2 or 3 years just to build that feature set to be able to even compete. And it sucks. Anyway.
Really cool explanation, and it's worth highlighting for everyone who's a student or entering the game business or has been in the game business struggling with these issues, that basically just studying the product of Metaplay will give you the recipe of what you need to do to get to the top grossing if you're struggling with the strategy, for example. But talking about the clientele, what does a company have to do to be able to even like ask that could they use your services? Like basically sounds like you get to be the selective one, like who you operate with. So are you taking in new projects at the moment, and by what criteria?
Right, yeah. So yes, we have maybe 2-3 slots for the year remaining. So we shall see. And our criteria usually is, honestly, and here's the harsh one. This is one of the iterations that we had with our business model. We decided to put a 5,000 euro essential minimum per month on, like if we're working with a project, we want 5K out of it, because that's us spending our time on the project. And a really big reason of why we did that is because it helps everybody else kind of self-select themselves. Of like, if you're aiming high and you're maybe raising some funding and you're forming a team, if at that point you kind of decide that what we're doing is worth at least 5K a month, because for sure it is. But if you feel that way, then you're in the very small kind of short list of, right, we really should talk. Like you speak my language, we understand the world the same way. I think that's interesting that we actually ended up self-selecting rather than us trying to somehow guesstimate whose game is good or something. I don't know. The game doesn't exist yet. No, like, yeah. I don't know who's going to be successful, and I'm not in a position to evaluate. So interestingly, the self-selection actually works in our favor a little bit. And what else? Our ideal customer, if you will, and project that I'm excited by is literally just somebody who wants to break into the top 100, and ideally by doing something that nobody's done before. So yes, it's cool to work on another merge game. Everybody and their mom are doing merge games, especially because Metacore is so successful. And there's always a trend, right? Mm-hmm. Personally, I'm always more interested in the people who want to set the trend. because that's what the tech is for. So I want to talk to those guys the most, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Anything more from the audience? Where, like, still have 5 minutes?
Do you take interns?
Question, do I take interns? We have one right now. So yes. And more to the point, we are hiring and growing. So if you're into solving difficult problems, making big games, you should talk to me. I've got some swag and some cards. And I've got the whole tech with me, so I'm happy to show the demo, the actual thing, later tonight. Also, I like beer, so there's that.
It's gonna be a long night.
Really cool. Perhaps about the kind of people that you're looking for. I look at your team and I see 90%, 95% technical people, but there is this still a dimension of working directly with the client.
Yes.
So does that kind of define what kind of personalities and skill sets you are looking for? So people who are technical and do well in these kind of...
Yeah, right. So we definitely have a couple of different archetypes, if you will, of personalities in the company, which is a good thing, obviously, always. Mostly technical people, because we make tech, so we have very few artists. I'm the artist. Out of the technical people, actually, what we are looking for the most, if we're going to go from there, is somebody who loves learning all the time. So our tech, all the cool stuff that we're doing, loves learning what our customers are doing, literally looking at their code base, learning how they've built a game, what kind of decisions they've made, why they've made them, and be able to understand our tech and the customer and kind of connect the dots and see the opportunities from a technical point of view. Of like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you did this and that, because I understand what you're doing and I understand what's possible, and by the way, how about this? Right? So that's creative problem solving and sort of evangelizing and being excited about something. So that's one. If you're a sort of extroverted programmer, love prototyping, bam, 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 like we have a job. But then, interesting enough, we also have the quiet, I don't really like people, social relationships are complicated, but I love solving extremely difficult problems, for example. We do have that as well, so, because we can kind of have the back office and the front office in Slack terms anyway, which I think is really interesting, because actually one thing I didn't mention, but that was a complete surprise to me coming from games companies into a tech company, was when I felt the difference of, if you're somebody who loves programming, loves technical problem solving, loves games, sure. Mm-hmm. But if you love the technical aspect or the engineering aspect of making games, generally you probably don't like working in a games company, because everything you do is liable to be thrown away at all times. People are telling you to not do good work, they're telling you to do fast work. And then when something goes wrong at the end of the day, because it was fast, not good, then it's your fault. And people are angry, and then it's you doing the extra hours. So like it can be an environment, a games company, where you cannot be as good as you'd want to be. So interestingly enough, when we take a step back from the daily chaos of making a game, and we kind of go, the interface is like making a release. Like, we're gonna do the thing, and that's amazing, but we're gonna take 2 months doing it, so now we're gonna get to focus for 2 months. And we do it, and we test it, and we release it, and then again, we're not part of the daily chaos of using it. So we can actually maybe facilitate, we can be a really nice place to work for a different type of a person who wouldn't necessarily succeed in a games company, but wants to work with creative people and games and be part of that story. So that was a complete mind blown for me when I kind of realized that the benefit of this dynamic. Sorry for asking a question nobody asked.
Basically, you are describing the environment in which the people fit, and that's basically what I wanted you to speak of when people are probably considering sending applications.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, yeah. I think this one is running out of time. So thank you so much. That was amazing, super
Thank you.
inspiring.
Thank you.
Looking forward to chatting with you later on in the evening. And everybody, if you didn't have the chance to formulate the question in your head because you are just overwhelmed by all the awesomeness, you can do it later. So that's also cool. And for now, thank you, Teemu Haila. And let's continue the program with the university hybrid project. So yeah.
Thanks.
And if anyone needs to, I don't know.